What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P here with another episode of Steelers Touchdown Under. Today we are talking about the quarterback conundrum, the quarterback question for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, who is it going to be in this matchup coming this weekend against the New York Jets at home in Pittsburgh? Now, look, there's a lot of people, I'm going to say this from the outset. There's people that are in the Fields camp. There are people in the Russell Wilson camp. There are people in the neither of them camp moving forward in the future. That all has to play out. There are people in the, look, I was in the Russ camp, but Justin Fields, has gotten to 4-2. He's young. There's potential there. Keep going. There's other people that are like, why is Mike Tomlin doing this? He rode the hot hand last year. This doesn't make sense. Other people like, get Russ in freaking now. And depending on how you're feeling as a Steelers fan this season, you're going to be somewhere in probably one of those camps or somewhere in between, right? Majority of you are going to be somewhere in between because most Pittsburgh Steelers fans just want to see the team win. And I'm one of those people. That's why for me, I've been more of the Russell Wilson camp when he's fit than the Justin Fields camp. But I want to talk about pros and cons of each gentleman. Now, we're going to talk through some stats to illustrate this as well. Obviously, the level playing field for them both is that they're on a 1-year deal. Obviously, youth is on Justin Fields' side. Obviously, age is not on Russell Wilson's side. But Justin Fields doesn't have necessarily the same level of playing maturity or the experience that Russell Wilson has. So I think those things are pretty clear. I don't think we need to everyone kind of knows that. One bloke's won Super Bowls and been to Super Bowls. The other bloke was a first-round draft pick, but, hasn't been able to make it work in Chicago. A lot of people blame Chicago's setup. A lot of people say Russell Wilson couldn't make it work at the Broncos, and that's why they got rid of him. But we've seen a very different Russell Wilson. There are a lot of players that have come out and hinted since there were other problems at the Broncos. So the interesting thing about these two guys as we go to the stats is one of the few things that they share in common. Oh, and I should say, not a lot of people talk about Justin Fields' mobility, but Russell Wilson is not a slow and unagile quarterback himself. But obviously, when you look at these two guys, you talk about that experience as being super key with Russell Wilson versus Justin Fields. With that, let's get into it a little bit more deeply. Now, I wanted to first start with why are we in this position? We're in this position because Justin Fields, despite being 4-2 as the Steelers starting quarterback this season, has only thrown for 1,106 yards. That's an average of 184.3 yards per game, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. So only throwing 1 interception is great, but he's not even average 1 TD a game. Go back to Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky kind of stuff here. Really, apart from the fact that he's not throwing interceptions. But it's not enough. And even though as a rusher, he's performed pretty well, at the end of the day, with 5 rushing touchdowns, he's rushed for an average of 38.5 yards a game. That's almost still a career low for him. So when he was quoted in the last couple of days as saying, I haven't played well enough to be the starting quarterback, that's why, right? And when you think about, Russell Wilson compared to Justin Fields, Russ is a guy that's deeply, deeply experienced. Russell Wilson's a guy played 12 years in the league. This is his 13th year. He's thrown for over 43,500 yards, career completion percentage of 64.7. He's thrown 334 TDs in his career. If he had a couple more years left, he'd probably be, I think he's top 10 in the NFL once he passes 370. So pretty incredible. And then last year, he obviously had, a pretty decent record as well, which we will go into. But from a Russell Wilson perspective, there's obviously a deep experience there and maturity that he brings to a role. And that's why for Mike Tomlin, it's an interesting piece if he does choose, and we may not know after today, after Friday in America, it might be leading close to the game. I do think they're going to want to make a call on this, though, sooner than that. But you've obviously got to think from Mike Tomlin's perspective, if they start Russell Wilson, he plays badly for a few weeks, then you can pull him and put in Justin Fields. Whereas if Justin Fields plays badly and you put in Russ, it's very hard to go back to Justin Fields. So this does make a lot of sense. And I've heard that story talked about, or that narrative talked about elsewhere, and I do agree with it. It does make more sense, particularly with the way that the offense has played so far. I also think, to me, it's not about arm strength. I do think Russell Wilson has a better deep ball, and I think that's going to come into play with guys like George Pickens. But let's have a look at them. So, obviously, as I said, career-wise, Justin Fields obviously has not played as long. You can't fault him on that against Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's obviously played more games, got a higher AV from Pro Football Reference. Career completion, though, I mean, that's something if you played more than 3-4 years in the league, you've got some decent numbers there that we can delve into. And from that perspective, Russell Wilson's 64.7 completion percentage for his career versus 61.2% for Justin Fields. Pass yards per attempt is 10% higher for Russell Wilson over Fields with 7.7 passing yards per attempt. Pass yards per game is very, very different. 169.1 yards per game is what Justin Fields averages through the course of his career passing. It's 232 for Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is the best part of 50% more passing yards per game on his career average. Past TDs, we're not going to compare them because obviously it's very different when you play years in the league. But the interception rate is very high. The interception rate to touchdown for Justin Fields is effectively, for every he's throwing interceptions on like over 66% of the compared of the touchdowns that he's throwing. So I'm making sure I articulate that right. Whereas for Russell Wilson, it's less than 30%, or it's about 30%. So it's definitely less than a third at 33%. Quarterback rating, 100 for Russell Wilson versus Justin Fields, 83.9. Rushing attempts, Justin Fields has rushed for 411 times versus Russell Wilson's 981, but Russell Wilson's got over double the yards. I mean, he's rushed double the time, but it puts into perspective, and I know Russ isn't in a 26 or 27-year-old quarterback, but it puts in perspective the mobility piece that Russell Wilson does have a history there of moving when he needs to move. And rush TDs, there's more for Russ. He's played longer. You're not going to dispute that. But Fields has had more rush TDs in the games that he's played. So that's what it looks like from a career perspective. But last year, comparing last year's seasons between the two blokes is probably a bit of a fairer way to look at things. Now, Justin Fields, it was kind of interesting when you look at how this looked last year. All right, last year, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson played in 15 games. Justin Fields played in 13. It was a 7-8 record for Russell Wilson. It was a 5-8 record for Justin Fields. So losing record for Fields in a bad Chicago team. I'll give him credit there. Losing record for Wilson in a struggling Broncos team as well. Completion percentage, 66.4%. So that was a higher percentage for Russell Wilson compared to previous times in his career. Russell Wilson threw for an extra 500 yards than Justin Fields last year at over 3,000. He did play 2 more games, but it's still averaging more than 250 yards per game more than Justin Fields. In those 2 games, if you combine them, he's still averaging 250 each of those games when he's playing. Pass yards per attempt was the same, which I thought was interesting. But Russell Wilson, 7 yards more per game. As I said, though, you've got to look at Russ played more games. The Broncos were not a good offense either. So it was what it was. But 26 TDs to 8 interceptions. You cannot slight that. That's versus 16 TDs and 9 interceptions for Justin Fields. You can't. 26 and 8 was, I think, top 7 in the league last year. In terms of the most amount of touchdowns, but then with the lowest interception rating, interceptions thrown. So this is huge from us. Like that ratio over 3-1 is pretty good. It's not even 2-1 for Justin Fields. So you got to really look at that. Quarterback rating, 98 versus 86.3. Obviously, the rushing is more in Fields' favor, but it wasn't as much as what you thought. He only scored 1 more rush TD. He rushed 44 more times. For definitely more yardage, but even the yards per attempt was 1 different. But we don't want Russ rushing. We've got Jalen Warren and Najee Harris and Shamplin and Jonathan Ward to rush. Justin Fields is doing a lot of rushing, not a lot of throwing. I much prefer if Russell Wilson throws for 230 yards average per game, 1 or 2 TDs, and the other guys, and because people are having to respect the passing game, that's opening it up for Jalen Warren and Najee Harris. So that's the thing that I do like about making a shift to Russell Wilson. I do think this benefits the Steelers. I think it benefits the wide receivers. I think it benefits the tight ends, whether it's Darnell, who Russell Wilson talked about a lot through training camp, whether it's Pat Fryermuth, whether it's Rodney Williams, whether it's Connor Haywood. Connor Haywood and Russell Wilson had a pretty good chemistry. And don't get me wrong, Justin Fields has found Connor Haywood in a couple of, particularly the last few games, and brought him in, and he scored a touchdown and all those great things. But if we're seeing these things out of Justin Fields, it's definitely made me think, what would we see out of Russell Wilson? I also think with Russell Wilson, when we look at, as much as people are not hating on Arthur Smith, I don't think it's been the best offense. I think Russell Wilson being able to go back and say, hey, and we wanted to change plays and audible. I know people criticize and say Justin Fields hasn't been able to do that, but also, is he capable of doing that well enough? With Russell Wilson, you've got an esteemed veteran back there. You've got someone that Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith, if they have to make a decision on the side of the field about something and in a timeout, Russell Wilson is going to be respected and have a bigger say in the matter and possibly make the better call and the right call. And we've seen that when Big Ben, toward the end of his time at the Steelers, was, drawing plays up in the dirt. So I just see I'm not going to call it a tidal wave, but I see so many positives with Russell Wilson being named the starter from this week, especially getting used to the offense, getting the offense thriving and firing before we get to divisional games. And then if you need Justin Fields, or you want to put him in for a package, or you want to put him in to end a physical game where the Steelers are up by 10 points at the end of and finish a fourth quarter, particularly when we go back-to-back divisional games toward the end of the season, that's the power of having Justin Fields. But I do think the Steelers should be going to Russell Wilson. It's the right decision for so many reasons. But you let me know in the comments. Do you hate it? Do you want Justin Fields instead? Or is it Russ time, baby? Let Russ cook. I think he's going to do the here we go, versus the let's ride and all that sort of stuff. We'll have to see what phrase he comes up with, once he gets a starting role. As much as I thought he was a bit of a wanker to go start season, in the preseason about, well, not even just that, trying too hard, I kind of bought into it. It's Russ time. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. If it's crap, we can go back to Justin Fields and do what we can. But I just think the Steelers, I've said this for such a long time now, for probably almost 5 years, or at least over 4 that I've been doing podcasts. The Steelers got to be able to regularly score 30 points. I don't see that with Justin Fields. We scored that many Steelers scored that many on the weekend through defensive turnovers. They do believe they can score more than 30 points on I'm not going to say consistent like week in, week out, but I do think if they have to, they can score 30 points with Russell Wilson at the helm. I know he's got to throw to people. I just think the ability for him to process what he needs to process back there at quarterback, and with a developed and refined and mature passing game, I think it exists. But I'm Matty P. As always, go Steelers.